Yes. Thank you for the warm welcome, Brooke. Hello, online people.
Look at all these shy people.
Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Lisa Logan. I head up the Canyon School District portion for Utah Parents United, and I'm also their social emotional learning advisor. And like Brooke mentioned, I know many of you might be here tonight because you heard the story of a Draper Park Middle School teacher who resigned over having to teach the second step social emotional learning program. And you're probably wondering what this respected and well-known teacher, husband, and father saw that would compel him to leave a job that he loved. Tonight, I will show you why. But I first want to say a big thank you to Sam Crowley for having the integrity to do that. He has joined all of you here tonight to learn more about how much bigger this issue is than just the SEL program in that one school, and we're grateful to have him here with us tonight. Sam, we really commend you for your bravery. I really want to say appreciate that. So, with that being said, let's get started. So, a lot of people think, just like with a lot of programs, that a program might start with great intentions and then get hijacked by bad people with bad intentions. But that is not the issue with SEL. And that's why I aptly titled it Sinister SEL, because literally, hold on, it's working. From its inception, the main goal of SEL has always been to indoctrinate our children and to create children that all think about the world in a very specific way. So Aristotle understood this. He said, all who have meditated on the art of governing mankind have been convinced that the fate of empires depends on the education of youth. Adolf Hitler also understood this. He said, he alone who owns the youth gains the future. And by 1939, over 90% of German children were a part of the Hitler Youth Organization. Not only did it allow the Third Reich to indoctrinate children at their most impressionable, but it let the Nazis remove them from the influence of their families. And the Nazi Party knew that families, which are private cohesive groups, right, not usually under political sway, were an obstacle to their goals. The Hitler Youth was a way to get Hitler's ideology into the family unit, and some members of the Hitler Youth even denounced their parents when they behaved in ways not approved by the Reich. Even Yuri Bezmenov, a KGB defector, knew that most of the Russian government's efforts to infiltrate the United States needed to be through psychological warfare, not physical warfare. He gave a warning to the US in this 1984 interview, which I'm going to play for you now, just a little bit. Okay, it says it cannot locate the internet proxy source. So basically what he says is that the Nazis were using ideological subversion, right? They wanted to educate 3 generations of youth in Marxist and Leninist ideologies because their minds were so plastic. And that was what the Russian government was focused on. Only 15% of their efforts went to espionage. 85% was this ideological subversion. And we see this now, this Marxist-Leninist ideology being pumped into the soft heads of our kids through social emotional learning. So the plan to get social emotional learning curriculum in schools and push Marxist and socialist ideologies was clear from the beginning. SEL programs were planned from their inception to be the entry point for CRT, or critical race theory, or social or racial justice, whatever you want to call it, and other UN-based initiatives like globalized education, promoting socialism over capitalism, advocating environmentalism to combat climate change, comprehensive sex education, and gender education, or theory, which we also call gender fluidity because it erases the gender norms. And the other thing is that SEL is everywhere. So since 2016, participation has grown from 8 states to more than 30 states and 1 US territory, collectively representing more than 11,850 school districts, 67,000 schools, 2 million teachers, and 35 million students, preschool to high school, according to CASEL. Today, all 50 US states have SEL standards and competencies for preschool. 11 states have extended preschool standards to early elementary, and 18 states have standards for K-12, and it's also everywhere through their Head Start programs. And there is tremendous political will to bring SEL to schools. You hear it everywhere, as evidenced by the more than 200 pieces of legislation referencing SEL introduced in 2019 alone. And SEL is woven into nearly every subject they are trying to teach in school. So you may ask yourself, who's behind the push for social emotional learning and what is their agenda? You got the hint there, the guy with the sweater. Uncle Sam is throwing the books into there. You don't need to think, you need to feel, and the child is very hypnotized by the Common Core SEL. So these are the entities that partner with national and local organizations to bring UN-based education to your community. They need social emotional learning to do this, and I've also posted this chart over here a little larger so you guys can see it and follow along as I do my presentation. But it really, it's an agenda coming down from the UN agencies through UNESCO, Sustainable Development Goals, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and then funnels down to your school through the organization CASTLE you see on the right-hand bottom side. We're going to go over all of this tonight. But first I want to talk about how SEL started. And SEL is deeply rooted in the history of American progressive education, with educators like Edward Thorndike and John Dewey advocating that we link education with psychology. They saw education's potential of social behaviorism, manipulating the psychological aspects of learning as a means of manipulating the child. Dewey was inspired by the Soviet educational system, and he was also a co-author and signer of the Humanist Manifesto, which was a religious document that rejected God and prescribed collectivism as a cure for society's ills. And collectivism is a political theory associated with communism. So anytime you hear that in your child's curriculum, start asking questions. More broadly, it's the idea that people should prioritize the good of the society over the welfare of the individual. Collectivism is the opposite of what America was founded on, which is individualism, right? Ideally, in a collectivist society, decisions benefit all the people, and the government has more control to distribute those resources. And in an individualist society, each individual has the right to an equal opportunity, and the government has less control, for instance, in a free market system. And results vary based on individual decisions, because success isn't a guaranteed, right? It's how hard you work with the opportunity that you get. So in order to implement collectivism, and in turn social emotional learning, there has to be more government control. So what did they do? They federalized the education system. The early awakenings of social emotional learning coincide and are related to outcomes-based education. The central idea being that the school system, i.e. the government, should establish centrally determined outcomes that the student should meet before progressing to the next level. The modern term for outcomes is competencies. And outcomes-based education developed into transformational OBE. I like putting words in front of things and changing definitions all the time. Designed to prepare students for life performance roles. And this was essentially social engineering, developing productive workers to serve the needs of the global marketplace. So training for global citizenship is established as the primary purpose of all education. And that's where Mark Tucker comes in. He's in the top, kind of towards the middle, next to Common Core there. And he was the former president of the National Center on Education and the Economy. And he wrote a now infamous 18-page letter to Hillary Clinton, who once served on his board for the NCEE, a week after her husband, Bill Clinton, was elected to be president. It urges the Clinton administration to advance the agenda to take over the entire US educational system, with the goal to train children in specific jobs to serve the workforce and the global economy, instead of to educate them so that they could make their own life choices and their own job choices. And it's important to note that social emotional learning was always a part of Tucker's original system. Since 1994, when President Clinton signed the Goals 2000 Educate America Act, which was largely based on outcomes-based education. So Goals 2000 contained 8 goals, but 2 of them relate to SEL.
Goal 1 concerns preschool. By the year 2000, all children in America will start school ready to learn. So you might think, great, they're going to learn numbers and colors and letters and stuff like that. No, they wanted young children to be ready to learn government-instilled attitudes, values, and beliefs. And Goal 8 stated by the year 2000, every school will promote partnerships that will increase parental involvement and participation in promoting the social, emotional, and academic growth of children. Note that academic growth is last on that list. Kind of concerning, no? And even though parental involvement is mentioned, many parents question whether the schools and the federal government should be setting norms for or mandating anything relating to the emotions and beliefs of their children. Nor did these parents consider themselves mere partners. It's kind of a weird thing to call a partner, right? A parent. Subservient to government entities in this realm. Parents and pro-family organizations have long argued that based on unalienable rights and thousands of years of history, as well as legal precedent, they have the right to direct their children's education and care, and especially the formation of their children's attitudes, values, and beliefs. I agree with that too, don't you?
No. Who made that statement?
Oh, I'm sorry, that was from the same article that this came from in the first. That was the Pioneer Institute. They did a white paper, which is also linked on your QR code page. Bill Clinton also signed into law the School to Work Act and the reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESHA, called Improving America's Schools Act of 1994, and these are laws that transformed education. These laws establish the following mechanisms to restructure the public schools. Bypass all elected officials on school boards and in state legislatures by making federal funds flow to the governor and his appointees on workforce development boards. Use a computer database, basically to track all of your personal identifiable information. I won't go into all that. And that information, that data would be available to the school, the government, and future employers. And to use national standards and national testing to submit national control of tests, assessments, school honors and rewards, financial aid, and the Certificate of Initial Mastery, which is designed to replace the high school diploma. So we're doing a nationally imposed curriculum here. And this opened the door to more federalized control of education and less local control, obviously, in No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top or Common Core, and the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is ESSA. And SEL was a prominent part of all of these statutory reauthorizations and initiatives. So, and then we move to Common Core, or what I like to call rotten to the core, because you can't talk about SEL without talking about Common Core, because that was the vehicle that integrated social emotional learning into every subject in our school curriculum. Common Core State Standards Initiative, which produced K-12 standards that were released in 2010, were adopted by most states in an effort to qualify for the Race to the Top funding. Not unlike the ESSER III funds or the American Rescue Plan funds of today, accepting these federal funds often come with strings attached or hoops that you have to jump through. For instance, the ESSER III funds that these schools have now been awarded basically requires them to use 20% of their funds for social emotional learning. Isn't that fun? Oh wait, I'm not done there. Despite promises by proponents that Common Core would be academic and rigorous, documentation shows that it wasn't. It demonstrates that a number of the standards would be used not for academic achievement or advancement, but for psychological training of children at a young age. SEL and Common Core were closely and intentionally intertwined. The various elements of SEL found in nearly every state K-12 standards framework and in the Common Core state standards, including, for instance, non-cognitive factors such as grit and perseverance when they're teaching math, right? And that having that be a measurable competency for their qualifying for knowing the math. So where did Common Core come from? There's a common misconception that it was a local effort.
right, put on by the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices and the Council of Chief State School Officers, or the CCSSO. And I messed that up. So on your chart there, where Linda Darlingham is to the right, it's supposed to be CCSSO. So if you start looking that up and hit it, and that's where the correction is after I went to print. In reality, Common Core and the bills that preceded it are all products of the United Nations in an effort to internationalize our education system. In 2004, Microsoft, or Bill Gates, contracts with UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, that organization there at the top. And it's also over there on the bottom left, Kelly's sitting right next to it. And they were going to fulfill part of UNESCO's Millennium Campaign goals, which was universal education and educating for a global economy. So a master curriculum for teacher training and information-based technologies and standards, guidelines, benchmarks, and assessment techniques is to be developed. In 2005, Bill Gates funds the new Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce, created by our friend, Mark Tucker. Right there, Mark Tucker, you see it's to the right there, the new Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce.
So if you could advance it from there now. Sorry.
It's okay, but my clicker is here.
Well, I could stand here and do it, but it's so that they're the same.
Oh,
The people online can see the same thing as everybody here.
oh, okay.
So you can just touch it here, or I'll put your clicker into mine, and then it will work.
Okay. Hold on, everybody.
We're just trying to sync up the people who are online with the people in the room.
Awesome.
Okay, now you are.
Move over a little so you
Shift.
can better.
Press the key, man. The shift key. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll just keep going from here. Okay. 2005, Bill Gates funds a new Commission on Skills for American Workforce, like I said. Adopting, can we move this so I can see my
Yeah.
screen? Okay, perfect. Awesome, thank you. It's called Tough Choices or Tough Times. And in 2008, Utah's Governor Huntsman touts it and joins with 5 other states, Massachusetts, Delaware, Arizona, New Mexico, and New Hampshire, who adopted in order to, quote, reinvent their education systems. In 2008, the Gates Foundation, along with 2 other foundations, created Strong American Schools. That's there on the left, bottom left, next to you is Millennium Development Goals. Yep, you saw this is connected. A successor to the Stand Up campaign launched in 2006, which was an outgrowth of UNESCO's Millennium Campaign Goals for Universal Education, and it calls for American education standards. Does anywhere see a governor involved in this yet? Nope. Is that working? Okay, I just have to click it. Okay, in 2008, the Gates Foundation funds the International Benchmarking Advisory Group report for Common Core Standards on behalf of the National Governors Association, Council of Chief State School Officers, and Achieve Incorporated, titled Benchmarking for Success, Ensuring U.S. Students Receive a World-Class Education. And that is that large one on the bottom right there, International Benchmarking Advisory Group. And Achieve Incorporated is, I have a little, hold on, actually, I think I have a, hold on. Right, oh yes. Awesome, Kelly, you don't have to work anymore. So this is Achieve right here. And so you see they're connected to Mark Tucker as well through NCEE. This report shows the United Nations is a member of the International Benchmarking Advisory Group for Common Core Standards. The member of mention is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which developed UNESCO's Millennium Declaration, later the Incheon Declaration. And you see that here as well. So this is OECD in this corner here. There's the Incheon Declaration. And over here is OECD and the Incheon Declaration. And then they partnered with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So really these UN initiatives are leading Common Core, right? Not the governors. In 2009, Mark Tucker writes a chapter in the book Change Wars, The Inspiring Future for Educational Change. One chapter is called International Benchmarking as a Lever for Policy Reform. The book mentions the UN's OECD launched Program for International Student Assessments, or PISA, in 2000 as a way to monitor the outcomes of education. Linda Darling Hammond, I'm going to first point out PISA. This is OECD, this is the PISA program, and Linda Darling Hammond is way down here. You can see who she's connected to here. Darling Hammond heads the SBAC, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, which supports the development and implementation of learning and assessment systems to radically reshape the education enterprise in participating states in order to improve student outcomes. In April 2009, the Gates Foundation members, along with a few dozen others, participate in a Washington conference and produce smart options, invest in the recovery funds for student success. These ideas were funded by the 2008 stimulus, ARA, or the American Recovery and Investment Act, and supported Race to the Top, which was the federal funding that we talked about earlier. Priority one was develop common American standards, also called career ready standards, in most states by January 2012. And in the summer of 2009, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the one I messed up on over here, CCSO, the National Governors Association, and Achieve Incorporated agreed to partner on a Common Core Standards project, and then it was implemented. So you may be asking yourself, who is UNESCO, right? And why is the UN, oh, what did I do? So interested in education in the United States? So while UNESCO claims that its role is promoting peace and security through international cooperation in education, the sciences and culture, they are also one of the prime supporters of comprehensive sexuality education for children. And they partner with the International Planned Parenthood Federation. And one of their stated main goals is globalized citizenship education, or GCED. Global citizenship education aims to empower learners of all ages to assume active roles, both locally and globally, in building more peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, and secure societies. A great deal depends, though, on who is defining these terms, right? Like inclusive and secure and peaceful and tolerant, what they mean by them, basically, right? And how they are to be measured. For instance, Kimberly Ells, who was supposed to be here tonight, unfortunately, she's ill. She wrote an amazing book called The Invincible Family, which we have back on the back table tonight, and it's available for purchase for $20, or you can Venmo her and just be able to take it home. But in her book, she writes, equitable and inclusive are elastic terms, open to a wide range of interpretations. If deference to equity or equality is required, then young people who embrace the concept of free market systems where inequalities are allowed may be tagged as harboring attitudes that are unacceptably inequitable and targeted for re-education. I don't know what happened. I know. I don't know what happened. Remind me later?
Yeah.
Maybe it'll take me back. Oh,
There it is.
It thought for a second. I don't know. It took my stuff away. So it's targeting me for re-education. I don't know what happened.
Do you remember what slide you were on?
It was that one. She continues, if inclusiveness is applied to matters of sex, then holding specific beliefs about sexual conduct, like for instance, you don't believe there's more than two genders, right, may be assessed as non-inclusive and therefore undesirable. In fact, inclusivity is commonly used to express acceptance of sexual variance. And we run into a real problem with this when it comes to social emotional learning, and specifically the organization CASEL. So CASEL is the organization that creates the 5 core competencies, it's the hardest word to say, behind all SEL curriculums, right? It's the standard to which they're measured. So you can see there are 5 core competencies, and I actually had to use a Wayback Machine to go back to a different version of their website to get this definition of SEL competencies that's here on the page. They say SEL competencies can be leveraged to develop justice-oriented global citizens. Again, you're hearing global citizens a lot in this presentation, no? Mm-hmm. And nurture inclusive school and district communities.
How far back did you have to go?
Pretty, actually it was more like 2020. I think they realized when they changed their, what I'm gonna go over in a minute, they changed their definition of social emotional learning. They cleaned up their website in other ways, which is funny because they leave their other stuff way open in their documents, which I find hilarious. So as OB splintered outcomes-based education under parental backlash in the 1990s, SEL proponents kind of salvaged what they could. And the 1990s saw a huge explosion in SEL activity. And CASEL was founded in 1994 by Daniel Goleman. He wrote Emotional Intelligence, is kind of considered the Bible for social emotional learning. And educator philanthropist Eileen Rockefeller Grobald. CASEL is right over here. You see Eileen Rockefeller Grobald, and she is the daughter of David Rockefeller. So they used to define SEL as the process through which children acquire the skills to recognize and manage emotions, develop caring and concern for others, make responsible decisions, establish positive relationships, and handle challenging situations effectively. That sounds amazing, right? It sounds real great. Unfortunately, that's not their definition anymore. And a lot of these word salads have different definitions than we think of what they are. It's interesting to note as well that one of CASEL's board members was, again, Dr. Linda Darling Hammond, that we talked about before. She was an Obama education advisor and transition team leader who was well known in progressive education circles for her advocacy of educational equity. And she's the co-author of that federally funded Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium we talked of earlier to test the Common Core standards. So again, you see the same people involved here in Common Core and social emotional learning. So in 2020, CASEL secretly updated their core competencies as well as their definition of social emotional learning. So what changed? They changed their definition of social emotional learning to transformative social emotional learning, which is social emotional learning done through an equity lens. They write, CASEL is refining a specific form of SEL implementation that concentrates SEL practice on transforming inequitable settings and systems and promoting justice-oriented civic engagement, which we are calling transformative SEL. This form of SEL is aimed at redistributing power to promote social justice through increased engagement in school and civic life. Anytime you hear the words distributing social power or social justice, it should start raising red flags. That is all leading toward Marxist and critical race theory material. They write further. They kind of put their foot in their mouth a lot, CASEL does. The concept of transformative SEL is a means to better articulate the potential of SEL to mitigate the educational, social, and economic inequities that derive from the interrelated legacies of racialized cultural oppression in the United States and globally. Again, they're pushing the narrative that the United States was founded on racism and systemic racism is global, right? Transformative SEL represents an as yet underutilized approach that SEL researchers and practitioners can use if they seek to effectively address issues such as power, privilege, prejudice, discrimination, social justice, empowerment, and self-determination. In essence, we argue that for SEL to adequately serve those from underserved communities and promote the optimal developmental outcomes for all children, youth, and adults, it must cultivate in them the knowledge, attitudes, and skills required for critical examination and collaborative action to address root causes of inequities. You want to know what the root causes of inequities are? White people, right? I would also, interesting to note, there was a news story recently about the White House including a abolitionist organization as part of the resources for, restarting the schools. And they specifically mention SEL and how it does not serve Black people because it's a white-based program. And so they're not being shy about this change at all. So instead of these SEL programs focusing on unity to achieve equality in the classroom, they instead want to achieve equity by resurrecting racism, pushing the narratives of white supremacy and white privilege, and promoting the notion that, this is a quote from Castle, racialized oppression was foundational to the establishment of the United States. Do you guys believe that?
No.
No. So equality and equity obviously mean two different things, right? The very foundation of America was based on equality, that all men are created equal. Not that all men should be made equal, and that's what they believe in equity. Equity teaches that you should treat people unequally to make them equal. Does not make sense, right? In order to correct systemic structural racism that they believe is in every facet of the United States. So if you're going to teach social emotional learning with an equality base, right? It would operate under the premise that the Constitution does not promise material outcomes to specific groups, but equal opportunity under the law as Americans, right? Conversely, transformative SEL teaches tenets of critical race theory, which is basically a Marxist ideology that asserts that race is a social construct. It's basically made up by white people, used to exploit people of color. And it asserts that you, your children, your family, everyone and everything that you know is racist, especially if you happen to be white, and that racism is a systemic problem throughout every facet and organization of the United States, our justice system, the schools, etc. And if you were going to do equality social emotional learning, it would foster universal social and emotional goals, right? Like empathy, kindness, relating to others, and in the classroom, and it would be free from sexual, racial, and political ideology, right? If we were going to have SEL in the classrooms, and a lot of district people that believe that we need that, because there's a lot of kids with trauma, and they don't know how to self-regulate, unfortunately, they don't have nurturing families, maybe that teach them these skills, then we need to have something that is not connected to caste, and I've been advocating for that. And equality SEL puts hope, power, opportunity, and freedom in the individual with the government as a guardrail. Transformative equity, or SEL, believes that because you're a racist and everything's racist, racist, right? That's why they have to teach your kids not to be a racist. They don't trust you to do it, right? If you're a part and parcel of this system that you grew up in, and you're a white person, you were born a racist, right? And you don't have the power to teach your kid not to be a racist. Marxism divides society into immovable groups or classes and demands that the material possessions of these classes be leveled by forcible, or i.e. by government intervention, redistribution of wealth and resources. So we're going to play a game. Who wrote it? Marx or Castle? Dominant U.S. cultural norms promote materialism or acquisitive individualism. I love these word salads. An orientation associated with health problems and unethical behavior. These norms are even more problematic when wealth and whiteness are conflated and uncritically accepted as indicators of success. This fosters a sense of white racial entitlement and dominance, as well as negative biases and stereotypes about people of color and those from low-income backgrounds. Pretty ugly, right? It was, anybody guess? Well, I put it up there, Castle. I'm sure you knew. So obviously with any of these organizations, and I honestly really encourage you, since this stuff is linked, look up all these connections, look up these organizations. And when you do, you realize that a lot of them are funded by liberal organizations with very radical agendas. I want to highlight just a few on this list here. When I start covering the data collection and assessment portion of this program, I would start asking yourself what the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation want to do with you and your child's data. Another person of note is the Novo Foundation. Their president is Warren Buffett's son. They're a radical feminist organization which says it is, quote, dedicated to catalyzing a transformation in global society, addressing the, quote, root causes of injustice, and, quote, proudly advocating for fundamental social change. Novo focuses especially on abortion rights and LGBT interests, and also left-wing economics. And the bottom here, also the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Remember, I mentioned Eileen Rockefeller Girl down here. Well, her dad, who funded all this, or who founded all this in the beginning, was David Rockefeller, right? And he's also mentioned Mark Tucker's 18-page Dear Hillary letter as being a part of that. So he was a part of the beginnings of SEL, and his daughter co-founded Castle. And he boasted in his autobiography, memoirs, of, quote, conspiring with a secret cabal of globalists against the best interests of the United States to build a one world political and economic system. So these are the people that are pushing for these organizations and for social emotional learning. So there are 40 SEL programs that meet the new transformative SEL standards. They call them their Castle Select, or like the best. And I've highlighted a few here that we know for sure are in Utah. I know there's plenty more, I'm sure. Do you see yours up there, anybody? Anybody see yours up there? Yeah? So the UN wants to use organizations like Castle and SEL programs in general to reprogram your child to think a certain way about the world and push ideologies like equity activism, socialism, gender fluidity, and climate change. This intent has been clear for quite some time. So Mary Graeber, she was a journalist who escaped communist Yugoslavia with her parents as a 2-year-old. And, oh, it's gonna fall. And she's also the author of the book, Debunking Howard Zinn. And what she would do is she would go around to these SEL conferences and she would attend them and then write these huge reports. And she would just be a participant, right? And just kind of go with everything that was happening. And then she'd report on what she saw and what she heard. And she reported that the larger goal of SEL, this was from the 3rd International Conference on Conflict Resolution Education in 2010. The larger goal of SEL is to train students in peace-building skills that you can carry over into adulthood as a global citizen and perhaps a global leader. So in the attempt to achieve this goal, American and Western values of justice, fairness, and lawfulness are shunned in favor of international law, cooperation, and global social justice. She writes, the fact that the conference is international in scope and has a kickoff keynote speaker, Kevin Jennings, indicates a much larger agenda at play. Kevin Jennings is right here. Note that he's connected to Bill Ayers from Weather Underground, Arnie Duncan. And the reason he's connected to Arnie Duncan is that he became Obama's Education Secretary's assistant deputy secretary. Okay, but he also in 1999 wrote the foreword to a book entitled Queering Elementary Education. He entered public service as the founder and leader of GLSEN, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, a group that promoted homosexuality in the schools. And advocates of SEL who have their own left-wing agendas or professional ambitions promote, quote, social acceptance through disturbing group lessons. She continues, the goal is nothing less than to re-educate our children, but at the most fundamental level, emotionally. The psychologically invasive strategies used in the classroom by a slew of re-educated teachers and emotional intelligence entrepreneurs are frightening. Such re-educators are not shy or reserved in their roles that extend far beyond educating in the traditional sense of imparting knowledge and teaching skills. They believe that students need to be reprogrammed in order to bring about a new international order that will ultimately subject the US to a cooperative international order. Their utopian vision includes having future leaders employ what they have learned under the peace educators' tutelage and solving international conflicts through mediation. On both an individual level in terms of each child and on an international level, their vision portends disaster, emotional scarring for the child, and vulnerability to the many leaders who will take advantage of pacifist American leaders. And so to achieve this goal of global citizenship, you need global education in order to push social emotional learning. And they aim to achieve global citizenship through the enactment of their Sustainable Development Goals. Right here on this chart, these SDGs, okay? It's an extension of the aforementioned Millennium Development Goals that helped to usher in Common Core, and they were set to be accomplished in 2000 and 2015. The Sustainable Development Goals are the objectives that the UN member states agree upon that will guide their efforts and direct their funding for the next 15 years. So the current Sustainable Development Goals were renegotiated in 2015, and the UN and its partners are working to accomplish them by 2030. Many of the SDGs are noble goals, right? No poverty, zero hunger, clean water, quality education. But it could be argued, and this is also in Kimberly L's book, but I didn't get a chance to note it there, that some are being pursued through the globalization and domination of all systems of civilization in the name of global equity. So the easiest way to accomplish their goal of global citizenry is through technology-based global curriculum and assessments. The main goal, remember, the main goal of social emotional learning programs is to move the minds of students into social engineering through subjective assessments that emphasize feelings, opinions, beliefs. Remember, you don't need to think, you need to feel. Multiculturalism, political correctness, diversity, global warming, gender theory, and social justice. And so after they established the Sustainable Development Goals, UNESCO had a big meeting called the World Education Forum in 2015, where they came up with the Incheon Declaration. That is here, on this chart over there. It's somewhere over here as well. Incheon Declaration.
Do you happen to know the meaning of that word, the Incheon?
I don't know the particular meaning. I don't know why they called it that. So it constitutes the commitment of the education community, 184 member states, by establishing a framework toward achieving the SDGs. I just remembered it might be where they had it, possibly. So they want to promote certain values and attitudes required by citizens and to address, quote, human rights, gender equality, health, comprehensive sexuality education. And I want to tell you that comprehensive sexuality education, if you weren't, Brooke and Nicole did an amazing job talking about comprehensive sex ed a few classes back. They're teaching kids to pleasure themselves as young as 8 years old. Yeah, it's gross. Climate change, sustainable livelihoods, and responsible and engaged citizenship. So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is a member of that UN Global Compact, and its report measuring distance to the SDG targets was developed in order to assist member countries, of which the US is a part, with their national implementation of these SDGs, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In the OECD, the future we want. So they are here in this delivery system, as well as here. And remember, they also were a part of the Common Core standards, right? So I need to mention that OECD also collaborates with UNESCO and International Planned Parenthood, who obviously is the largest promoter of sexual rights, children's sexual rights in the world, and that promote this comprehensive sex ed. And the Open Society, they also partner with the Open Society Foundations, led by billionaire political activist George Soros. It has also received funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So in their Future of Education and Skills Education 2030 document, published in 2018, they say children entering school need to value common prosperity, sustainability, and well-being above other concerns, and that, quote, curricula should continue to evolve, perhaps in radical ways, that, quote, reflect evolving societal requirements. What kind of radical ways do they want to change our education system, right? So OECD, and I mentioned earlier, has long administered the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA test, to measure cognitive skills, but now they're branching out. In 2017, it launched its Study on Social and Emotional Skills, or SSES, and SSES, which is up here, 2015 to present, Social Emotional Skills, SSES here. It branches out into methods of measuring and shaping students' personalities. That sounds scary, right? So, the SSES will analyze 2 cohorts of students at ages 10 and 15 to determine what social emotional skills they have and should have, and to develop international instruments to measure such skills. This extraordinarily intrusive study surveys students, parents, teachers, and education administrators to gather data on children's social emotional skills, family background, child's performance, home learning environment, parent-child relationship, parental style, learning activities, and parents' own attitudes and opinions. SSES will also analyze information from students' interaction with online instruments to surveil, quote, what people do, think, or feel when interacting with and responding to the item or task. So the SSES will address numerous questions. This is from their actual page on their website, talking about the SSES. And you can just look at some of these. I'm going to highlight just a few. Which family learning contexts, such as parental styles or learning resources, influence children's social and emotional development? Do you want the OECD kind of intruding into what your parental style is? Probably not. What are the social and emotional skill gaps according to children's gender and socioeconomic background, and what are their likely causes? So these assessments represent an expansion of student surveillance beyond the school and into the home and family life. Noteworthy also is the admission from OECD that the sensitive data gathered from this surveillance will be used to impose government-favored SEL standards and skills on families. So what government-favored positions does the OECD promote? Does anybody need me to go back? I saw you all taking pictures. No. I'll go back. This is also from Kimberly L's book and also one of her Epic Times articles. Oh, that's very true, Esther. The slideshow is on the QR coded thing, so you'll be able to go back and check my sources, and I encourage you to check. And you also got emailed a resource page with the links to all the information I found on this stuff, broken out by the organization and the subject matter. So please look at those resources when you get home. So the NTC says that global education or UN efforts are designed to focus on environmentalism. Not a surprise, right? They want to have you focus on climate change and economic change, requiring new economic, social, and institutional models, and social evolution arising from, quote, cultural diversity. Encapsulated in these 3 points are the seeds of the global takeover of resources, a transition from capitalism to more equitable economic models, i.e. socialism, and the intentional rise of diverse family structures and a sexually diverse culture. So, I know, I can see you're getting worried. Their plan is to measure student performance in the 5 broad domains known to psychologists as the Big 5 model of emotional regulation. I'm missing a, hold on one second. No, it went somewhere. It's okay. Emotional regulation, engaging with others, collaboration or agreeableness, task performance, and open-mindedness. And it's important to note that these are the same characteristics that were measured in the 2012 and 2016 presidential campaigns when there was a controversial partnership between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. And they basically gave people a score on the internet and then targeted ads to them based on their personality type. So the OECD says there's consequences for disappointing results. The organization is seeking to measure student personality to gather policy-relevant insights for participating countries. The inevitable consequence in countries with disappointing results will be new policies and interventions to improve students' personalities, to ensure competitiveness in the global race. And I just want to note before I finish this quote, most of the resources I'm giving you today are from their own words and documents. Okay, I don't have to find fringe sources. These people are basically admitting what they're doing. So just as PISA has influenced a global market and products to support the skills tested by the assessment, the same is now occurring around social emotional learning and personality development. In its global competency for an inclusive world document, the OECD reveals its decidedly anti-family position. It says, quote, the skills, attitudes, and values that shape human behavior should be rethought to counter the discriminatory behavior picked up at school and in the family, right? So remember, they're looking at your parental style. They're asking your kids, what parts of religion or culture keep you from being more inclusive? So think about that as I talk about this. And we do that in order to teach young people to, quote, challenge cultural and gender stereotypes and to help create tolerant, integrated societies. And I want to remind you that our teacher over there in the back said that the second step program was decidedly anti-family, right? It made the children question their family's beliefs and values. And it's to create tolerant and integrated societies, but I'm not so sure about that. Their end goal to use these SEL assessments to gather data to help them figure out how to create programs that coerce children away from the ideals of their family and into their way of thinking. So now I'm going to talk about the really yucky part of this, is the big data and FERPA. Online learning programs and assessments. Is your student and family's data protected? And I know this is a long quote, but I have to read it because it basically tells the entire story, right? And this is from a Politico article in 2014. The amount of data being collected is staggering. EdTech companies of all sizes, from basement startups to global conglomerates, have jumped into the game. The most adept are scooping up as many as 10 million unique data points on each child each day. That's orders of magnitude more data than Netflix or Facebook or even Google collect on their users. Students are tracked as they play online games, watch videos, read books, and take quizzes. The monitoring continues as they work on assessments from home or assignments from home, with companies logging children's locations, homework schedules, web browsing habits, and of course their academic progress. Students showed streams of data about their academic progress, work habits, learning styles, and personal interests as they navigate educational websites. All that data has potential commercial value. It can be used to target ads, ding, 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 Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, right? To the kids and their families, or to build profiles on them that might be of interest to employers, military recruiters, or college admissions officers. The law is silent on who owns that data, but Kathleen Stiles, the Education Department's Chief Privacy Officer, well, in 2014 she was, acknowledged in an interview that much of it is likely not protected by FERPA, and thus can be commercialized by the companies that hold it. And FERPA is the Federal Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It was established in 1974 when the floppy disk came out. You know, kind of needs to be updated, right? I don't think anybody portended the disaster or the amount of data that would be going around today in 2021. And it was put into place to protect all that personally identifiable information. But schools are a rich source of personal information about children that can be legally and illegally accessed by third parties. With incidences of identity theft, database hacking, and the sale of personally identifiable information rampant, there is an urgent need to protect students' rights under FERPA and raise awareness of aspects of the law that may compromise the privacy of students and their families. Do you guys know what's happening with your child's data as they use those Google Chromebooks? No. Do you? Have you asked the district? No. Yeah. So FERPA, unfortunately, had some amendments happen to them in 2008 and 2011 that changed the protection for your child and for your family. And it gave third parties, including private companies, increased access to student data. It's significant that in 2008, the amendments to FERPA expanded the definition of school officials who have access to student data to include, quote, contractors, consultants, volunteers, and other parties to whom an educational agency or institution has outsourced institutional services or functions it would otherwise use employees to perform. So, you know, they stated that they wanted to have greater access to student data to, in their own words, validate our tests, assessments, and educational programs, which is their primary business. These amendments are critical to supporting initiatives like Common Core, right, that depend on the collection of student data to monitor implementation and also to measure success. For example, the amendments give companies like Google or Parchment access to education records and other private student information. Students are paying the cost to use Google's free servers by providing access to their sensitive data and communications. The 2011 amendments allow the release of student records to for non-academic purposes and undermine parental consent provisions. The changes also promote the public use of student IDs that enable access to private educational records. So when we view that in the light of the fact that these online assessment tools now use digital educational badges, right, that use digital currency-like technology, you have to start asking yourself, where is this going? Arnie Duncan, former Secretary of Education, said badges can help speed the shift from credentials that simply measure seat time to ones that more accurately measure competency. But then what happens if maybe your child's not competent in the way that they think of the word inclusive, right? Because maybe they believe that there's more than there's only two genders, or that they don't believe in climate change. The implications of this are frightening. OECD's study on social emotional skills will measure students' social emotional aptitude and provide them with a score, just like an academic score that goes on their report card, that will follow them from preschool to age 20. And I see you all nodding your heads like this. I know. What's going to keep anyone who has access to this information in the future from eventually using this score, like China's social credit score, credit system, to eventually red flag our students or punish students and their families for not agreeing with their views on issues like climate change, gender fluidity, or critical race theory? We don't know, right? So I know that's a scary question. I'm gonna let you think about that while I invited Kelly England up. Kelly England is going to, I lost a bunch of my slides. I don't know what happened to them. They like fell on the ground or something. Oh, I found them, sorry. Comes up, she's gonna talk about how SEL violates parental and student rights, how it puts teachers in a position they are unqualified to be in, and how SEL is being implemented in Davis School District. Then I'll come back up and I'll tell you about Canyon School District and what's happening there and the second step curriculum. Please welcome Kelly England.
All right. Well, I'm excited to speak to you guys. I am not a public speaker. I'm like, Lisa is the pro at this. Right here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move to my slides. This is one of Lisa's slides. So let's see if it works. I'm going to have a short video quick. Is it going to do it? Maybe not. With an ad.
Simply choose the bill you want to pay, how you want to pay.
Let's do that. And this is by a doctor and a lawyer and a professor.
The current popularity of social emotional learning, or SEL as it's called, represents progressive education's greatest victory. Historically, what schools taught and how they were conducted was in the hands of a locally elected school board. But gradually, during the 20th century, state commissions, state boards, and more recently, federal authorities have taken control of what is education's most fundamental question. And that is, what is most worth learning? What from the universe of ideas and thoughts should be taught in schools? Life's ultimate questions: what is a good human being? What is a good society? What is a worthy life? Have essentially been eliminated from the curriculum in favor of a relativistic world.
Come on back. Oh God.
Operationally, this has meant that the subjects of history and English literature have been sanitized. The good habits and virtues and a sense of right and wrong has been replaced in our schools. But by what? By a pop psychological school program, social emotional learning, that endeavors to teach students 5 competencies that are very self-oriented. The self and group norms are really thin rule upon which to base a serious moral question. This whole situation really perfectly summarized by a Connecticut housewife, mother of 5 public school students. She said, I feel as if the school is teaching what I'm supposed to teach, and I'm left with teaching what the school should teach, math. Social emotional learning is just the latest flawed product of progressive educators, and it needs to be replaced.
Major concerns about social emotional learning are that it is a move away from academic education and an emphasis that is not healthy on attitudes, values, beliefs, and mindsets of children. And there's great subjectivity and difficulty even among adults to agree on those things. And it is also tied and closely linked to the Common Core and competency-based education disasters that are currently happening in the United social emotional learning is a major danger to academic achievement, to privacy, to health. There's a major concern about the scientific accuracy of this. The research base just is not there, despite all of the claims by proponents. What is especially concerning about SEL assessment is that the data from those assessments, which is often collected without parental knowledge or consent, is put into state longitudinal databases that can follow children for life.
SEL represents the continued minimization of true academic work with very little research basis to back it up. A second finding is the substantial and troubling problems and consequences of SEL, especially to student privacy, to autonomy, individuality, and even freedom over their own futures. A few examples of that. First, with respect to implementation. Many of these programs are essentially psychological evaluations performed not by professionals who have had many years of training to do this, but by already overburdened teachers and administrators who are given a little training and then told to go and improve children's psyches and personalities. The assessment of children under these programs is admitted even by the most enthusiastic SEL proponents to be hit or miss. And these amateur evaluations will presumably be included in the student's school data files. Another problem, mistaken evaluations can lead to serious consequences to children, putting many of them on the road to further unnecessary evaluations or mistaken diagnoses, and perhaps even dangerous psychotropic medications that are already overprescribed in this country. And then I think our third central finding is that through SEL, the government is grossly overstepping its boundaries to supposedly benefit society and the economy in particular. By what right does the government presume to administer psychological and mental health evaluations to children, perhaps without their parents' permission? By what right does the government decide what is the correct personality for a free American citizen? By what right does government seek to transform a free citizen into the person that the government deems most useful to the state and to corporations?
I'll go back for you. I just have to make Corinne the host.
Okay.
We are going on a family vacation.
Okay. Do you want me to advance the screen?
Okay, I'm going to start out with a quote. I love Thomas Sowell. The problem isn't that Johnny can't read. The problem isn't even that Johnny can't think. The problem is Johnny doesn't know what thinking is. He confuses it with feeling. Sorry. So online, just read it. I didn't speak into it. So yeah, I thought that was a really good quote. So some of the SEL concerns I'm going to speak about. I'm in the Davis School District, so a lot of my research has been within Davis School District. I've been talking with the equity director, the SEL director, with principals and teachers, and the learning and curriculum department, and my board member a lot. So, so a lot of mine is coming from them. So just to give you an idea of kind of what's going on in our districts. Davis School District had a building community supplemental instruction, it was called, that they recently just put on hold. When we talked with the equity department, they said they worked closely with the SEL department. And one of the statements in their building communities was anti-bias education cannot happen without a strong foundation in social emotional learning. The chart below shows how the anti-bias lesson can be incorporated with the K-6 Sanford Harmony curriculum. And when I saw that, that was a big red flag to me. Why do they need an SEL program that's instituted in our schools to bring about an equity program? So it showed to me there that SEL is trying to bring in equity. And then another concern, and the Sanford Harmony I brought up, that is actually in my children's elementary school. I'm concerned that they'll use it to push a political ideology or theory, influence religious beliefs, or take the place of the family. transfer instruction from the family, civil, and religious institutes to school, political agendas, and government, and then the data collection, which Lisa will talk about. Talking about transformative SEL, which Lisa talked about, I pulled up some of the trainings from Castle, and one of them was using SEL as a lever for equity. And this is one of their slides that they had in this training, which Lisa's talked about a lot of this. So self-awareness, racial, class, gender identity, self-management, that collective word, collective agency, which, what does that mean? What are they collective? That's very concerning to me. Social awareness, belonging, relationship skills, collaboration, co-construction, and then responsible decision-making, which is distributive justice, collective well-being, which there's that word again, collective well-being. So yeah, that was really concerning to me. To go over like student and parent rights, this is actually, if any of you got to listen to Joel Thornton when he came and spoke a few weeks ago, he has a section that's awesome in this. It's on the student and parent rights, and it has law cases that were won. I mean, the law really supports parents, and even in Utah, we have amazing laws that support parents. So the Supreme Court has found that parents have a fundamental right to control the upbringing and education of their children. Courts have decided that public schools have considerable discretion over the content of curriculum and composition of the learning environment. However, schools cannot usurp the parents' role in guiding children's beliefs and emotional development and in guarding their children's health and well-being. Students have a right to scientifically accurate information. Students have a right to religious freedom and cannot be forced to engage in activities that violate their conscience, which in Davis School District in the building communities, there was a lesson taught on gender identities with the building communities in a school without parental consent. And then the next day that the program was put on hold. That's when because then it got turned over to the Utah State Board of Education. And they said, we're putting it on hold until they figure that out in the Utah State Board of Education. So right now it's on hold, but we need to keep a watch on it. Students have a right to free speech. Schools may be violating students' First Amendment rights if they require them to use words or express agreement with statements that are not scientifically provable or to punish students who express disagreement, which I know there are many instances of students writing papers or things and getting zeros or being disciplined by teachers. One of my big concerns is that unqualified teachers and educators training in social emotional skills. Just a personal story that we had happen to me and one of my children is starting in kindergarten, she started in with some headaches and stomach aches and would throw up once in a while she was in school. The teachers were always like, she's having a really hard time focusing and attention. And they kept pushing us towards attention problems and things like that. But at home, my husband and I were not seeing attention. I worked in the psych unit. My education was in psychology. And in the psych unit, I worked with children with ADD, just was not seeing those things in the home. And then we went to a bunch of doctors and everything. And one of the doctors was like, well, let's have these teachers fill out this survey on what they're observing in the classroom. And the teachers filled out the survey and the doctor was ready to diagnose my child with ADD and start her on Ritalin. We did not feel good about that because we did not see that in the home. And so we said, no, we're just going to hold off and wait. Come to find out years later, it was actually an anxiety disorder, and Ritalin would have been horrible for her. So just going back, teachers are not qualified to be teaching these things in the school. Also, just working within psychology field, and when I was in the psych unit, there was always, we would talk to them a lot about a balance in areas with the mental and physical and spiritual aspects of things. So a big red flag for me with social emotional is, why are we doing self-awareness and social awareness just through a social emotional lens? There is an agenda behind this, that they are just focusing on that, and they've taken out the spiritual and they're attacking the physical with these gender ideologies. So, and then, sorry, let me figure out where I'm at here. And many studies suggest that striving to grow in a variety of areas in our life supports healthy emotional and mental wellness. So yeah, so it's a concern that we're just focusing on the social and emotional skills. In Davis, a lot of teachers will say, but it's working, you know, and they'll say, and last year I was even in a meeting with, that we knew he was speaking about it. He said there were no suicides in Davis last year, which there could be many reasons. Last year was not a normal year. So I think there could be many reasons. He's like, and we'll contribute that to SEL. And I was sitting there like, okay, where's your research for one, you know, and you cannot take last year as a normal year. And I've been trying to find the suicide rates for Davis just to see, but it's just interesting because if you look at suicide rates, which I have in the past, family is a huge contributor to decreasing suicide rates, and social emotional learning and all the research we're doing is going to take that from the family. So that is a huge concern for me. Here's the Davis School District vision statement. Employees and students acquire and effectively apply personal and social attitudes, behaviors, and skills necessary to lead happy and fulfilling lives. Yet again, why is it the school district's place to define what's a fulfilling life and what behaviors our children need? They'll tell you that they only use the CASEL 5 competencies. They're kind of, when I'm talking to them, I brought up a lot of the CASEL things with them. So they're trying to distance themselves a little with CASEL, say we only use the 5 competencies, but the programs they're using are approved through CASEL. So like in my children's elementary, it's Sanford Harmony, and then they use restorative practices. I don't know much about restorative practices, so I'm not an expert on that. And then in my Sunset Junior High, they use Second Step. The funny thing about it is it's a team of teachers who are putting it together, choosing what lessons. So your second grade teacher, first grade teacher in my junior high, a science teacher, like they're deciding what your kids need social emotionally. And then, yeah, they're instant. The Sanford Harmony is actually a computer program. They're like, you can actually get on it and enter in. And so they are doing it through a computer program, which Lisa talked about is a concern. And then when I talked, like I said, when I talked to the equity department, they told me they're really involved with the SEL department. And then it was interesting, at the Davis SEL symposium they had a few weeks ago, they had Abby Cox there and Tammy Pfeiffer to speak. And I was waiting, my board member I've been talking to was like, I'll tell you about it when it's all done. And I actually had a friend who ended up going to it. And she's like, that Tammy Pfeiffer, she was like defensive. Like she was like, you need to get this in your schools, and just really defensive, which was really a concern to me. But an interesting thing about Tammy Pfeiffer, she's with Unite.us, which the founder of that is Tim Schreiber, who is the co-chair of, who's the actually board chair of CASEL. And then Roger Weisberg, is that how you say it? Weisberg is the co-board chair who's part of Unite.us too. So all of these people, as Lisa said, they're all interconnected. So they say they're only doing the CASEL 5 competencies, but it's all interwoven and everything. And I'm finding that a lot of them, I think there's a lot of ignorance involved. Like they don't really understand. Because once I told my board member about, who Tammy Pfeiffer is, she's like, well, I don't know her personally, like kind of got, and I'm like, well, she's with Unite.us. And so anyway, so I just thought this was interesting. This is what my principal at the elementary said is our SEL goal for our elementary. Students will improve academic outcomes and study skills, work habits by identifying and explaining our 5 core competency areas at 90% proficiency as measured by a student survey at the end of each of the 5 units. I have to laugh at that because I'm like, how is that going to improve academic outcomes and study skills by explaining like you have grit? So anyway, it's not a well-written goal in my opinion. And then those are just headings under the 5 competencies. So like I know myself is under self-awareness. So things like that, which I don't know, do you want just any teacher teaching your kid? I know myself, or things, I think that's the family's role. Yeah, and there's the concern of the self-suck, like focusing, yeah, there's a
Can I
lot.
ask a quick question?
Yeah,
How did you get those from your school? Did you
which
talk to
part,
the
this?
principal to get those competency goals for your, is that district-wide, is that just
So
your school?
Davis district, yes. So I don't know what district you're with. They will say we use the Castle 5 competencies, which are the self-awareness, social awareness, relationship building, those competencies. And she had a slide with the competencies as well. And then these are just, and then under that, they have like the subheadings, and these are like subheadings. So these banners are actually at our school in the elementary. They have them hanging and things like that. Did that answer your question? Yes. Okay. And then, so an interesting story about the surveys is Lisa gave me a list of all the surveys she researched that they're doing through SEL. And so I let Kathleen Cronister, I said, are these being done in Davis or are they going to be done? She said, yes. And I said, okay, which ones? and then she referred me back to my principal. She keeps referring me, ask your principal. So I know these surveys are being done, but she'll refer me to my principal, who then says, we're developing the surveys. So her SEL team's making these surveys and they'll be ready whenever, but they're just a quick check to, anyway. So it's just kind of funny. We know surveys are being done and assessments. We're just not sure. Yeah.
No surveys can be done that ask personally identifiable information without parental consent, according to Utah law.
But
and
it's
oftentimes
done,
at the beginning of the year, they'll have you fill out a whole bunch of forms, and it's often in there. So if they give the survey down, towards the end of the year, you may not even realize it's happening if you just signed a whole bunch of papers at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do know of another district where they did panorama and parents were not asked, and that's an SEL.
Sharks survey is a big one.
Yeah, that one's a concern, which they say they send out. But yeah. So a lot of people ask, what do we do? So I kind of had an action plan, and it's just based off of kind of some things I've done. But when somebody told me about SEL, you have the question, what's so wrong about it? But read SEL, and really, like Lisa said, go on Castle. Like a lot of it's just, they condemn themselves, really. There's a lot of concerning things, and then we'll include with the email Brooke sends out with the attached video, all of our research and things like that. But find out your school and district SEL plan and programs, and then find out what data and survey collection they're doing, and how it's being implemented in your child's school and class. And then talk with SEL directors, principals, teachers, and school board members. If we're concerned, we need a bunch of us speaking out. One person can't really, they think I'm crazy after a while. So opt out of surveys and data collection in any programs you do not agree with. I talked to my board member. We can opt out, but it's going to be diligence on our part, where you're going to need to talk with the principals and teachers and actually sit down and look through the curriculum. Just don't say, oh, I don't agree with it. Let's educate them as well, why we're concerned. And then another concern is their SEL book lists and what they're promoting in the libraries and in your children's classrooms. So I would check out your school and district SEL book lists and online libraries. So I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
Thank you, Kelly. So I'm going to go over Second Step. Second Step is owned by Committee for Children. I'm going to try to run through this. I know I'm running out of time. Before we have
The plug.
okay, it's fine. I think we got it.
Yeah, it's just very sensitive. So
I know. Okay. So every year, Second Step reaches more than 20.5 million elementary and middle school students, including the students in the following Utah school districts: Canyon, Sevier, Jordan, Provo, Ivids, Utah Vista, Tooele, and Washington County, as well as the Utah After School Network. Thank you, Natalie, for compiling that for me on the internet. Slide in another post she did. So, and this is where I honestly started. I saw on the board agenda the responsive services slide of the starting plan for the school year included the words implicit bias and microaggressions, and that was like red flags. Those are CRT words. So I called the responsive services director and I asked him, well, how are these words being used in responsive services? And he told me, oh, it's just for the kids don't learn those words. It's just the administrators, and it's just to see if there's bullying, they want to make sure that it's not racially motivated. I'm like, all right. But when I got back from vacation, I started researching Second Step. Okay. And so I went on their website and I went to their YouTube channel and also went down to the district office and physically looked at the curriculum myself, which is the papers. And this is what led me to further look into CASEL's website and the documents and beyond, all the stuff I've shared with you today. And so while the second step curriculum itself on paper that's been purchased by the district, right, does not itself contain transformative SEL or CRT lessons, there are places on their website that provide administrators and educators with additional resources that do, as well as videos that are laced with propaganda for teachers and students. This is just their anti-racism and anti-bias resources. To summarize, they basically say they're using CASEL's definition of transformative SEL. And as you can see there, they're critically examining systems of power, questioning longstanding beliefs, assumptions, and policies to move toward a just and equitable future. Again, it's pushing that whole Marxist CRT rhetoric. And then they also push these learning for justice alignments, which is basically extra lessons you can tack on to the existing curriculum that do contain CRT type lessons. And the bottom here was like, go home and talk to your parents about, the history of racial bias. So they recommend teaching them in tandem. So again, it kind of flies under the radar of parents in the district because, and I asked the responsive services director this, I'm like, what's going to keep teachers from just using this stuff? And he's like, not really anything. And you can see Learning for Justice has a fun website. It talks about police violence. It talks about Black Lives Matter matters, how you need to discuss whiteness. And Second Step's YouTube channel shows their critical race theory views in action. Their trainings and webinars reveal their agenda to incorporate adult SEL. They're very, very going strong on this right now because what they want to do is they want to indoctrinate the teachers first to become community organizers, right? Who will then want to use these extra lessons and curriculum to turn their students into social justice activists. So in their presentations, using SEL to create equitable schools, again, they're using their SEL stuff to correct systemic oppression and inequities for people of color. Again, that systemic racism CRT narrative. And in this presentation, disrupt the status quo, how SEL can address implicit bias and build equity. Again, they're talking about systemic racism. These two educators have this back and forth, and she's like, no one's been born and raised in the United States is immune from inheriting the implicit bias of our ancestors. And another representative follows by saying that's why she believes we're having a national reckoning on race. And this was right after the George Floyd stuff happened. And their banter continues. There will be those that say, I don't want to give up my white privilege. It's hard if you've been in a position of power to give up that power. I know, it's ridiculous, right? So again, what they mean by implicit bias is that if you're white, you're automatically racist for Black people, and you're automatically in a position of power and have white privilege, and you need to be sorry about it. Yes, Mr. Marks. So I took that information and I emailed my district representatives and I emailed the responsive services director and I said, this is unacceptable. Here's all these links to all these different documents and videos and all the stuff that they said. And I have maybe one board member kind of listening to me and researching it, but then a miracle happened last week. Sam Crowley. Last week he resigned over the second step SEL curriculum. He writes, as a rule, I think that most people agree that the skills which the second step curriculum is supposed to teach students are good and helpful, but the way that these skills are presented in the second step curriculum are concerning enough to me that I cannot in good conscience present the material to my students. Material which teaches students that their parents are, quote, roadblocks to their goals, material which contains propaganda and encourages students to become activists, among other things. I am especially uncomfortable with the anti-family undertone I found in the second step curriculum, particularly regarding the relationship between the students and their parents, which the curriculum occasionally calls, quote, other generations. I am very concerned that this is in our schools. So, of course, this email prompted one of the board members I've been in contact with about this issue, and it's been listening to me the most. And this person had no idea that these videos even existed. She wasn't a board member until after this SEL curriculum was adopted by the district. And She was unaware they existed, and then she watched them this weekend. And the superintendent and her pulled some videos down. One of them had a small clip of Black Lives Matter marching. They were talking about students using their voices, and one of them, I don't understand exactly the parameters around why it was pulled down. But that's what happened. And so I spoke with this board member last Friday, and they plan to make several recommendations to the school board in Canyons. That all parents should have access to the second step videos without having to go into the district office and look at them, although I'm going tomorrow. I just want to let you know, to look at them. She wants an opt-out option for SEL, which is going to be it's great. And I'm so thankful to Kelly, to Natalie, to anybody who was on, we were on the thread and people were giving their input and so many people spent time. I think Jenny Earl, right, as well, helped write the language for us. I'm so grateful to them, but it's going to be difficult because remember, SEL is interwoven into all aspects of our curriculum. And she wants a recommendation for a full review of the curriculum as a board agenda item. So they're going to decide on that tonight in their internal meeting. So on the 31st, they're going to possibly discuss it. And just to kind of wrap up, Utah First Lady's Abby Cox's goal is combating the empathy crisis. Kelly kind of covered this a little bit. The Show Up initiative will focus on 4 areas. One of the first ones there is increasing social emotional learning in schools. Want to increase it, really? And one of the people she's working with, as Kelly mentioned, is Tim Shriver, who's the board on CASEL. He's also the co-founder of CASEL, right there. Tim Shriver. Yes, not you don't say. So, what can we do? First and foremost, keep your family unit strong. I love that Kimberly Ills right about this and like her about the invincible family, because the family unit is our defense against this indoctrination of our children. You know, we need a strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, and it starts at home. You know, talk to your kids about the dangers of the socialist communist welfare state. We have talks about this all the time at the dinner table. You know, my kids will tell me, you know, like handouts don't work, you know, people need to work hard. And I want you to demand parental rights and privacy protection. Start asking questions about where your children's data is going. Fight with facts, not feelings. Please go over the resources we've given you. Educate yourself so that when someone asks you that question, like Kelly said, you will have an answer. You'll have an elevator pitch for them as to why SEL doesn't fight with you. And educate other people while you're at it. Once you know your deal, like educate other parents and teachers and district board members.
Let me just make a comment.
Yeah.
Back on the empathy, I took a lot of hits for putting that on the list of bad words.
Yeah.
But when you know how they're using empathy through social emotional learning, like in Salt Lake City School District, they literally are segregating the kids by race to teach them empathy.
Yeah. I also want to note that at the last board meeting, they were talking about segregating the kids' classrooms based on who was wearing a mask and who wasn't. That kind of alarmed me just a little bit. Yes, you're right. Absolutely, Natalie. So I want to end with one of my favorite quotes. Ronald Reagan said, I'm going to try not to cry because it's just so true. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States where men were free. And I don't know if you feel this in your bones like I do, but there is something really wrong going on with our country right now, and our freedoms are at stake. So I'm thankful for every single one of you that's here because I know you're a freedom fighter. You came here to educate yourself, and you heard about something that was going on, and you showed up to find out what was going on and find out how you can help. And I need every one of you because, again, Abby Cox's agenda, we're going to have to fight hard, but if we work together, we can do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. She spent so much time, her heart, everything she has on this to protect freedom. And